wet hair milady. This is Eric. Is your hair wet?
Nope.
We're the founders of Hit Subscribe. This is our weekly Facebook Live, and today's topic for discussion is working from home. So, specifically, our prompt is when you work for yourself or you work remotely, how do you make yourself accountable every day and like related topics. Um, Eric Eric can't like make himself unaccountable. Like I'm thinking about like maybe the best way to approach this is to think of like when you first started working for yourself and like kind of as your own boss and you wake up and your days are yours. Maybe like how did you start your system of being super accountable now? And then like maybe I'll talk about my stuff
I mean, if I think so, it's been. Well, I remember to set "Do Not Disturb," by the way, so we're not getting like. Anyway, I'm proud of that. Like I never remember to do that. So everybody that's watching, it's like obtrusive. It's the notification that says we're live, like we didn't know it, and so everybody watching gets this bzz, bzz.
too. Oh, how interesting!
But not this week.
How did you make yourself accountable?
No, did it?
I
I hope you didn't hear the buzz. I have "Do Not Disturb" on. Why would that happen?
I'm not taking any lessons from you on how to.
Somebody get Mark Zuckerberg on the phone. Why is that happening?
All right.
I started working for myself 6-7 years ago.
Wow. All right.
Well, I started working for myself a lot longer ago than that, just as a moonlighter.
Oh,
but
right.
yeah, it was about 6 years ago, maybe full time. And I never really viewed accountability as a problem, I guess, because if you don't work, eventually like repo men are going to show up. I mean, but I'm trying to think like I guess there would be the idea of like how do you deal with maybe the lack of structure and the tendency to procrastinate, or I guess the lack of structure would be a big thing. When I first started working for myself, I probably didn't really follow some of the standard advice. Like I know there's advice out there that says like get up at the same time you would every day anyway. Maybe go to a different location.
Dress
or
like
something.
you're going to work.
Yeah, there are things like that. I did none of those things, but like then again, I'm not really the sort of personality to struggle with motivation or procrastination. It's not really.
You're like the ideal personality type for being your own boss. Like I think you thrive, directing yourself in your own projects. So, like just personality type alone might be a good indication of how hard you're going to have to work in order to have that discipline.
I mean, this is a question I get through my blog. Like, I think there are. I'm just trying to think of how to unpack it and give somebody advice. Like, if you have been working in a 9-to-5 job, co-located, like a standard office job, there are some things you're going to have to grapple with. The first thing will be the lack of, especially today with like the prevalence of open office plans, you're kind of constantly like surrounded like immediately cheek by jowl with people.
Yeah.
And so there's probably like certain surface level pieces of accountability, like if you're on Facebook or whatever, that there are like 3 people working in your lap who will judge you.
Yeah.
And so that goes away.
Although
there's like, what else? The fact that you have to come in and be there, so you can't sleep till whenever you want. Like there's generally accountability for your hours. So a lot of those things create a situation of what I'll call superficial accountability. And then when that's removed, you might, I guess, initially kind of be like a kid going off to college.
I think the other thing though is that like when you're in an office and when you're surrounded by these people, there are also a lot more time wasters, and you will quickly get used to the fact that like you are insanely more productive and you get a whole bunch of hours of your day back, and you might even wonder like, what do I do with all of this time that I used to spend doing what was I doing? I guess going out to lunch with coworkers, talking to coworkers, getting distracted by meetings I didn't need to be called into, all that kind of stuff. So you actually I don't know, I think lots of people find themselves with almost so much productivity that they get a lot of their stuff done for the day, and then they're like, um, huh. Should I work more? Should I cut off early? And that's another thing. Like, when do you call it quits? Is a really interesting thing when you start doing self-directed work, and when no one's telling you time to clock out, or like when it isn't generally accepted what time to clock out. Like, when do you call it on a day? When is a day to success? It's much harder to tell when you're self-directed. I don't know. Maybe
That
not
seems
for
like
you.
sort of the opposite problem. Like
Really?
uh, in the prompt about like how do you hold yourself accountable,
Oh, all
to be
right.
like you hold yourself too accountable.
Well, I mean, like,
So I mean, but what happens with the fact with like the superficial accountability at the office?
mm,
Sure, you go home and one of the things that will strike you is without people talking your ear off at the water cooler. Like when you're at work, when you're in a physical location, anything you do there by default you think of as work. Even if it's that you get in, somebody tells you there's donuts in the break room, you go eat some donuts, and then what's the point of even getting started when you have a 10 o'clock all hands meeting?
mm,
You will consider that work no matter what. But then when you're at home, those things are removed, and that like kind of faux accountability, that structure falls
yeah,
away. So
full
you
accountability.
can go in a few different ways. The first thing is you could realize that it probably will take you a fraction of the time to do the same amount of work that it would at the office where there's a lot of distractions.
Mm.
So you can kind of like if you encounter that, you might think like, oh well, I can sleep till noon, work until 2, and then like am I done? I don't know. But the other direction that you can go is if you're used to faux accountability, um, when that's removed, you might just not do anything. Like, hey, there's no like supervisor that's going to give me a hard time for having YouTube up, so I'll put YouTube on and I'll just watch videos while I work, and then you get distracted. So I think like if you're talking about how to prepare for and remediate some of that stuff, you're going to have to adjust to, I would say, being much more like goal and task oriented.
Mm.
So you've got to get away from the idea that just because it sucks or just because you're at a physical location, it's work, because that's not true. If you're
Yeah,
working for yourself and or remotely located, you're going to have to change the definition of work to doing things that are actually productive.
yeah,
And like I'm not really kidding with the like Protestant work ethic stuff. There is very much this sense of like um, if I'm not enjoying it, it must be work, and
yeah.
that has to go away. So I don't know. What do you think? Like goal setting at the beginning of the day, like putting out at the beginning of the week, the beginning of the day. Here are the things that need to be accomplished for this day to be considered a success. I think is important.
That is important. I think like the first day, I remember the first day after I quit my job and I was like a freelancer, and like now I was working for myself or whatever. Like, I woke up and there was just like this intoxicating feeling of I could do anything today. I could do anything. And then I was like, I'm going to write some articles and I'm going to submit for them to be published in various outlets. And I sat down and I was like, I'm going to write an article. Oh my goodness, this is amazing. But like, there wasn't like, I mean, there was sort of a goal to that, like, oh, I'll get published or whatever, like, but
Hmm.
the big thing was like, I could do anything. What do I do? And like that, what do I do? Honestly, you could get real trapped in that. Like, it makes me think of like, sometimes on weekends here at our house in Michigan, when you're like, we could play bags, or we could go out on the boat, or we could, you just start listing all the things, and then you don't do any of them because you're like, if I choose one, I won't choose the others. And I'm not willing to like make that risk. So you could get caught in your own head. Not you. You're superhuman. But like, I remember definitely. And then day two, I wake up and I'm like, I could do anything. What should I
Well,
do?
that's kind of where the split happens between, say, remote work, one of the things here, and working for yourself. Those are actually two, maybe
Mm,
they seem superficially the same
that's a
if
good
you're
point.
a physical presence salaried office worker, but it's really not. So if you're working for an employer and the employer says, good news, we've figured out it's the 21st century and you can work from home. Um, the accountability there is going to be different because even though you don't have somebody standing behind you asking you if you're working or whatever, you still have like deliverables and
Deliverables, yeah.
interactions and stuff. You still have a boss that's like, I want you to do the following things this week.
Mm.
So when it comes to working from home or working remotely alone when you're still an employee, I think the important thing to do there is number one, recreate some kind of work environment. So, like, don't assume that if your kids are running around or your pets or maybe somebody stops by, that's going to be a distraction. Those things are going to take you away from work. So, like, you need an environment in which you can productively work.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that in a lot of senses, like, whether you keep the same hours or not as you would at the office, a lot of that depends on the nature of the work. Like, is that necessary? You're still going to need to probably have teleconferencing stuff go on, but the broader structure of work will be there. The only thing I could see maybe is if the kind of faux accountability, if you have a walking around supervisor that's going to give you a hard time if they see social media, or even you have a net nanny at your office and you can't go to those sites, you're going to have to deal with the availability of those distractions and nobody there to kind of crack the whip. But like, I think the thing I'd say there is don't procrastinate. Basically, like,
Yeah.
you're still going to, if you're like, oh, okay, today I'm just going to watch videos all day or whatever, in a couple weeks, you're going to have a one-on-one with your boss that's going to be unpleasant or uncomfortable. So just keep your eye on that ball and understand that you need to get stuff done. So that's the remote worker, and I don't think that's as bad. Going into business for yourself, if you've always been an employee especially, is a whole different animal. And that's where that kind of stuff you were talking about comes up, where it's like, well, what do I do? Especially if you don't have like clients yet. You could do all sorts of completely useless
Build
things.
yourself a website for your freelancing business. Like yeah, it's just there's a
I
lot.
need business cards, right? That's a thing.
Yeah, right.
Um,
I was lucky to have like a good amount of work lined up for me when I was done, but again, like I was struck by how many hours I had left after getting done like the same amount of work I would get done at work. But
yeah, I would say if you go freelance, there's going to be a few phases of what happens, and it depends how
mm,
you go freelance. So if you do what's called boomeranging, like you're working, for Acme Inc. 9 to 5, and then you're like, hey, Acme Inc., I quit, but I'm willing to come back as a consultant or whatever. You can then basically turn your former employer into your first client.
mhm.
And when you do that, you're just going to kind of act a lot like an employee, and it'll almost be like the remote work paradigm we described. If, on the other hand, you have maybe a partner that has good income, and you're just going to quit and pursue your dream of making money on the internet or whatever,
Mm.
that's where you can get into sort of a quagmire of doing tasks that don't prove useful. So the first thing you're going to have to do is get yourself some clients, and then you're going to have this kind of breakdown of client work versus working on your business. I think what happens is a lot of people decide they're going to, be an entrepreneur for some definition of that. And then you can really get into this series of tasks, none of which seem to pay any dividends. Like, you're hoping, oh, within a month or two, I'm going to have clients. So what I really need to do is blog and speak and write for, guest publications and all this other stuff.
Mhm.
And then you have a lot of energy for that because, hey, you've got your own business. It's fun. And then after a month or two, when nothing happens, you can run out of steam.
Oh man, I don't have
And
any money.
is any of this like paying off? What am I even doing? And then
Yeah.
maybe you just start to like be unmotivated.
Yeah.
That's a whole other level of issue, and it's something that people face. And I think there you have to create a process that you follow of like looking for leads, doing the things that will eventually pay off, and then it becomes task focused. If you are a 9 to 5 worker, you can probably relate to this with maybe a frustrating job search. So, you
Yeah.
get laid off wherever, whatever happens, and then you know that you have to find a job, and that might not seem like it's paying quick dividends, but you
Yeah.
can't just give up. So it becomes a numbers game. It's like, well, I don't know what people do. I'm going to apply to 10 companies a day, or I'm going to, make this many phone calls a day.
It's a really good comparison, I think. Yeah.
So that's like the early stage for a business or for, you as a newfound self-employed person. In the beginning, the biggest thing is getting clients. And that's where you can, number one, do a lot of useless stuff Number two, I guess get caught up in your newfound freedom and maybe do nothing. Or three, get discouraged and do nothing. And all of those need to be combated by you laying out a plan
Yeah.
that gives you a manageable amount to do each day, and that you can keep sticking to even if you feel discouraged or tired or whatever. I just got to do 10x of this, spamming people on LinkedIn or whatever people do.
I do think that, like, if your personality type is to procrastinate and you know that about yourself, that you're going to have a harder road than most. Not that it would be like impossible or whatever, but that's a really important thing to know about yourself and to be aware of that tendency, because I think that, like, neither of us are really the procrastinating types. And that has really worked in our favor, and that it would be a lot more difficult if you knew you were the type of person to procrastinate, to kind of like stick with it every day.
Well, if you're a procrastinator, one thing I would definitely recommend is there's this concept in the solopreneur entrepreneurial world called a mastermind, which is basically you find other people in kind of similar positions, ideally with like similar businesses or something. But like a mastermind is basically career development for people where that's not a thing. So if you've started your own freelance business, you might sync up with, I don't know, three other non-competitive freelancers or something, and you have this group where you have a call every week or every 2 weeks. And typically what happens is you will take turns discussing business problems that you're facing, but there is an element of these meetings where you discuss, what you set out to do over the last week and what you actually did, and that can kind of create a commitment device, create some accountability.
Yep.
If that's not for you, maybe seek out other ways to have commitment devices, meaning you do things that I don't know how to describe a commitment device. Like the biggest example would be like you go on all over social media and you're like, I'm going to lose 50 pounds this year. So you do something where you create consequences for yourself if you don't follow through with it.
Yeah, there are other like little kind of productivity hacks that, like, sound sort of no brainer, but like if you don't know that these exist, you could look them up, such as, I don't know exactly, I've never used any of them, but I know that there's something that you can install on your browser that will not let you access your email or any social media accounts, and you can just like keep that on for a certain amount of time if you know that's going to be a distraction for you. And then there's the Pomodoro technique that you use, where like you set a timer, and they have apps for this too, where you set a timer for, is it 25 minutes? That's usually the standard, and then 5 minutes off.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll time you, and you're supposed to work for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5 minute break, and it prevents you kind of from being like, oh, I'll just go wander over to Twitter really quick, because your break's coming. You'll get 5 minutes to go check it later.
Let's just wander over to Twitter for some angry politics for a few minutes.
Yeah, don't go to Twitter at all. Actually, that's recommendation 3. Delete your Twitter account. Anyway, no. So those are like just like little baby hacks during the day that if you weren't aware of, you are aware of them now. Probably it, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. I think probably too, it somewhat depends on personality.
Yeah.
I am personally like kind of type A, self-directed and introverted, so like working by myself at home is perfect, and I don't struggle with it. So I guess I would say you can probably make it all work from home, work for yourself, no matter what personality type you are. But if you are somebody who procrastinates, or if you're more extroverted or what have you, then you might want to think going in about what your plan would be for certain eventualities. Like, I'm a procrastinator, so how will I stop myself from doing that? Or I'm extroverted, and being at home by myself all day isn't going to do it, so I know of some co-working spaces or some coffee shops or what have you.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, that's probably all I got.
All right. Tune in next week where we'll talk some more about things.
Well, next week, it might not be at the regular time.
Oh, right.
We will be on the West Coast.
Yes.
So we'll try to do something from a hotel in Oakland, California, to be determined.
Yep.
It's up in the air. It's a cliffhanger. You got to tune in next week.
It's a cliffhanger. I enjoy that.
All right. Well, thanks for watching.